Emma had always believed in kindness, even when the world seemed indifferent. Working as a maid in one of New York's most luxurious hotels, she followed the rules until one cold winter evening, when she broke them for the sake of compassion. A frail homeless man sat shivering near the hotel's entrance, his weary eyes pleading for warmth. Without hesitation, Emma offered him a meal and a place to rest for a while. But kindness came at a cost. The next morning, her employer found out and fired her on the spot. With no job and no savings, Emma faced an uncertain future. Little did she know, the man she had helped was about to change her life in ways she could never imagine. Emma walked out of the Grand Hotel with a heavy heart. The biting cold of the New York winter felt even harsher now that she was unemployed. She clutched her coat tighter around herself, replaying the manager's angry words in her mind. "We don't pay you to take in strays. You're fired." Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't regret what she had done. The old man had looked so frail, his hands trembling as he wrapped them around the cup of hot coffee she had given him. She had only wanted to help. As she stood on the sidewalk, uncertain of what to do next, a voice called out, "Miss, wait." She turned to see the homeless man she had helped the night before. He was still wearing the same tattered coat, but his eyes were bright with gratitude. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You lost your job because of me." Emma forced a smile. "It's not your fault. I'd do it again." The man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You have a good heart, and I'd like to repay you." Emma was about to protest. What could he possibly offer her? But before she could speak, he pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," he said. "Tell them George sent you." She hesitated. "George?" The man simply smiled and walked away, disappearing into the city streets. Curious but skeptical, Emma followed the address the next morning. It led her to a tall glass building in the heart of Manhattan. A security guard greeted her politely, as if he had been expecting her. "Right this way, miss," he said, leading her to a grand office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Inside, a well-dressed man stood behind a mahogany desk. He looked up and grinned. "Emma, right? George told me about you." Emma was confused. "Who is George?" The man chuckled. "George Thompson, founder of this company." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "The homeless man?" The man continued. "George used to be the CEO, but after losing his wife, he abandoned his fortune and chose to live on the streets, searching for true kindness in people. You helped him without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of person we need here." Emma's heart pounded. "You mean?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "If you're willing, we'd like to offer you a job." Tears filled Emma's eyes. This time, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. She had lost everything for a single act of kindness. And now, that kindness was changing her life in ways she had never imagined. Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. Yesterday, she was a maid struggling to make ends meet. Today, she was being offered a job in one of the most prestigious companies in Manhattan, all because of a single act of kindness. She swallowed hard. What kind of job?" The man behind the desk smiled. "George told me you have a strong work ethic and a kind heart. We need people like that. We have an open position in our community outreach department. You'd be helping with initiatives for the homeless, people just like George. Emma's eyes widened. A job helping others? It was more than she could have hoped for. I don't have a degree. I was just a maid, she said hesitantly. The man shook his head. Compassion can't be taught in a classroom. We'll provide any training you need. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes, a familiar voice said. She turned and saw George standing in the doorway. He was still wearing his worn-out coat, but there was a new light in his eyes. Emma rushed toward him. George, I don't understand. You're a millionaire. He chuckled. I was, but after my wife passed away, I lost my way. I wanted to disappear to see if people cared about more than just money. Most people ignored me, but you saw a human being, not a homeless man. You changed my life, Emma. Now let me change yours. Emma wiped her tears and nodded. Yes, I'd love to take the job. Weeks passed, and Emma found herself thriving in her new role. She helped organize food drives, set up shelters, and worked closely with people who had lost everything. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a real difference. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she saw George standing outside. Still dressing like a homeless man? She teased. He laughed. Old habits die hard. Then his face grew serious. Emma, I have one last surprise for you. She raised an eyebrow. Another one? He handed her an envelope. Confused, she opened it and gasped. Inside was a letter offering her a full scholarship to any university of her choice. I know you said you don't have a degree, George said. Now you can get one. No more cleaning hotel rooms, unless you want to own one someday. Emma's hands trembled as she held the letter. George, this is too much. He smiled warmly. You gave me back my faith in people. This is just my way of saying thank you. Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks as she hugged him tightly. She had lost her job for an act of kindness, but in return, she had gained a future beyond her wildest dreams. And all because she chose to help a stranger. Emma held the scholarship letter in her trembling hands, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't quite put into words. Just weeks ago, she had been scrubbing floors and making beds, barely scraping by. Now, she had a job with purpose, a future filled with possibilities, and a friend who had changed her life in ways she never imagined. But deep inside, something still troubled her. George, she said softly, why haven't you gone back to your old life? You could have anything, your company, your wealth, your home. But you're still. She glanced at his worn-out coat, the same one he had been wearing when they first met. George chuckled. Emma, I spent years believing money could solve everything. But when my wife passed, I realized how empty my world was. That's why I walked away. I needed to see if kindness still existed. He smiled at her. You showed me that it does. Emma wiped a tear from her eye. But you don't have to keep living like this. You've given me so much. Let me do something for you. George sighed, staring at the city lights. Maybe it's time for a new chapter for me, too. A month later, Emma was standing in front of a small but beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood. She had spent weeks searching for the perfect place, and when she finally found it, She made George an offer he couldn't refuse. "I don't need much," George had said. "Just a warm place to rest and a reason to wake up every morning." So Emma helped him settle into his new home. She even convinced him to take a part-time role at the community outreach program, where he could use his past experiences to help others who had lost their way. One evening, as they sat on the porch, George looked at her and smiled. "You know, I thought I was the one changing your life, but it turns out you changed mine too." Emma laughed. "Guess we're even, then." For the first time in years, George felt like he belonged somewhere again. And for the first time in her life, Emma felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the years passed, Emma earned her degree and continued her work in community outreach. Inspired by George's story, she started a foundation dedicated to helping the homeless reintegrate into society. And George? He became the heart of the organization. With his wisdom and compassion, he helped hundreds of people get back on their feet. One day, at a fundraising event, a wealthy businessman approached Emma. "I was once like George," the man admitted. "I lost everything. If it weren't for your foundation, I don't know where I'd be today." He handed her a check. "This is my way of giving back." Emma looked at the check, tears welling in her eyes. It was a donation large enough to fund shelters for years to come. She turned to George, who gave her a knowing smile. "Kindness always comes full circle," he said. And Emma knew without a doubt that losing her old life had been the best thing that ever happened to her. Because in the end, it led her to something far greater: purpose, friendship, and the undeniable truth that one act of kindness can change the world. Compassion has the power to transform lives, not just for the people we help, but for ourselves as well. When we give without expecting anything in return, the universe finds a way to give back in ways we never imagined.